Greetings, welcome to Into the Text. My name is Reed. Today is day 45 of our read-through of the Bible. We're going to be picking up Matthew 27, verses 1 through 31, and then Leviticus chapters 15 and 16. All right, are we ready? Let's grab our Bibles and let's begin. Jesus brought before Pilate. Chapter 27. When it was early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people plotted against Jesus to execute him. They tied him up, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate the governor. Judas's suicide. Now when Judas, who betrayed him, saw that Jesus had been condemned, he regretted what he had done and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, What is that to us? You take care of it yourself. So Judas threw the silver coins into the temple and left. Then he went out and hung himself. The chief priests took the silver and said, It is not lawful to put this into the temple treasury, since it is blood money. After consulting together, they bought the potter's field with it, as a burial place for foreigners. For this reason, that field has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. They took the 30 silver coins, the price of the one whose price had been set by the people of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me. Jesus and Pilate. Then Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, You say so. But when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he did not respond. Then Pilate said to him, Don't you hear how many charges they are bringing against you? But he did not answer even one accusation, so that the governor was quite amazed. During the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing one prisoner to the crowd, whom they wanted. At that time, they had in custody a notorious prisoner named Judas Barabbas. So after they had assembled, Pilate said to them, Whom do you want me to release for you? Jesus Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ? For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. As he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent a message to him, Have nothing to do with this innocent man. I have suffered greatly at the result of a dream about him today. But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to have Jesus killed. The governor asked them, Which of the two do you want me to release for you? They said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, Then what should I do with Jesus, whom you call the Christ? They all cried out. They all said, Crucify him. He said, Why? What wrong has he done? But they shouted more insistently, Crucify him, crucify him. I added that last one. Jesus is condemned and mocked. When Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but that instead a riot was starting, he took some water, washed his hands before the crowd, and said, I am innocent of this man's blood. You take care of it yourselves. In reply, all the people said, Let his blood be on us and our children. Wow, that's not smart. Then he released Barabbas for them, but after he had Jesus flogged, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the governor's residence and gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe around him, and after braiding a crown of thorns, they put it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and kneeled down before him. They mocked him. Hail the King of the Jews! They spat on him and took the staff and struck him repeatedly on the head. Then they had mocked him. When they had mocked him, they stripped him of his robe and put his own clothes back on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. All right. I'm going to jump over to Leviticus. Leviticus 15, male bodily discharges. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, Speak to the Israelites and tell them, When any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. Now, this is his uncleanliness in regards to his discharge. Whether his body secretes his discharge or blocks his discharge, he is unclean. All the days that his body has a discharge or body blocks his discharge, This is his uncleanliness. Any bed that the man with a discharge lies on will be unclean, and any furniture he sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches his bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. The one who sits on the furniture of the man with the discharge sits on it must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. The one who touches the body of the man of the discharge must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge spits on a person who is ceremonially clean, that person must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any means of riding that the man with the discharge rides on will be unclean. Anyone who touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. The one who carries those items must be washed his clothes, bathed in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone whom the man with the discharge touches without having rinsed his hands in water must clean his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. A clay vessel which the man with the disease touches must be broken, and any wood utensils must be rinsed in water. Very repetitive. Just say any contact, wash yourself, be unclean until evening. Purity regulations for male bodily discharge. When a man with a discharge becomes clean from his discharge, he is to count off for himself 7 days for his purification, and he must wash his clothes, bathe in fresh water, and be clean. On the 8th day he is to take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and he is to present them before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent, and give them to the priests. And the priest is to make one of them a sin offering and the other a burnt offering. So the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord. So the priest is to make atonement for him before the Lord for his discharge. When a man has a seminal emission, he must bathe his whole body in water and be unclean until evening. And he must wash in water any clothing or leather that has semen on it, and it will be unclean until evening. As for a woman whom a man goes to bed with, then the seminal emission, they must bathe in water and be unclean until evening. Female bodily discharges. When a woman has a discharge and her discharge is blood from her body, she is to be in her menstruation 7 days. Anyone who touches her will be unclean until evening. Anything she lies on during her menstruation will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches any furniture she sits on or must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be clean until evening. If there's something on the bed or in the furniture she sits on, when she touches it, he will be unclean until evening. And if a man actually goes to bed with her so that her menstruation impurity touches him, then he will be unclean 7 days. And any bed he lies on will be unclean. When a woman's discharge of blood flows many days at the time of not her menstruation, or if it flows beyond the time of her menstruation, all the days of her discharge of impurity will be like the days of her menstruation. She is unclean. Any bed she lies on all those days of her discharge will be like her menstruation. Any furniture she sits on will be unclean, like the impurity of her menstruation. Anyone who touches them will be unclean, and he must wash his clothing. He must wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Purity regulations for female bodily discharges. Purity regulations for female bodily discharges. If she becomes clean, are there times they don't? Scary. If she becomes clean from her discharge, then she is to count off for herself 7 days, and afterwards she will be clean. Then afterwards she'll be clean. And on the 8th day she must take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and she must bring them to the priest at the entrance of the meeting tent. And then the priest is to make 1 sin offering and 1 burnt offering. The priest is to make atonement for her before the Lord for her discharge and purity. Summary of purification regulations for bodily discharges. Thus you are to set the Israelites apart from their impurity, so that they do not die in their impurity by defiling my tabernacle, which is in their midst. This is the law for the one with the discharge, for the one who has a seminal emission and becomes unclean by it, for the one who is sick in her menstruation, for the one with a discharge, whether male or female, and for a man who goes to bed with an unclean woman. The Day of Atonement, chapter 16. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, when they approached the presence of the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother that he must not enter at any time into the holy place, inside the special curtain in front of the atonement lid that is on the ark, so that he may not die. For I will appear in the clouds over the atonement lid." Day of Atonement Offerings. In this way, Aaron is to enter into the sanctuary with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He must put on a holy linen tunic. Linen leggings are to cover his body, and he is to wrap himself in a linen sash and wrap his head with a linen turban. They are to be holy garments. So he is to bathe his body in water and put them on. He must also take 2 male goats from the congregation of the Israelites for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Then Aaron is to present the sin offering bull, which is for himself, and is to make atonement on behalf of his own household. Next, he must take the 2 goats and stand before the Lord at the entrance of the meeting tent. And Aaron is to cast lots over the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and 1 lot for Azrael. Aaron must then present the goats which are designated by the Lord. Then he is to make a sin offering. But the goat which has been designated the lot for Azrael is to be stood alive before the Lord to make atonement by sending it away into the desert to Azrael. The sin offering sacrificial procedures. Aaron is to present the sin offering bull, which is for himself, and he is to make atonement on behalf of himself and his household. He is to slaughter the sin offering bull, which is for himself, and take a censer full of coal and fire from the altar before the Lord, and a full double handful of finely grained, fragrant incense, and burn them in the cistern. He is then to put the incense on the fire before the Lord, and the cloud of incense will cover the atonement lid, which is above the ark of the testimony, so that he will not die. Then he is to take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the eastern face of the atonement lid, and in front of the atonement lid he is to sprinkle some of the blood 7 times with his finger. Aaron must then slaughter the sin offering goat, which is for the people. He is to bring its blood inside the curtain, and he is to do it with his blood just as he did the blood of the bull. He is to sprinkle it on the atonement lid in the front of the atonement lid. He is to make atonement lid a holy place. So he is to make atonement for the holy place from the impurities from the Israelites and from their transgressions in regard to all their sin. And thus he is to do it in the tent of meeting, which resides for them in the midst of their impurities. Nobody is to be in the tent of meeting tent when he enters to make atonement in the holy place until he goes out. He is to make atonement on his behalf and on the behalf of his household and on behalf of the whole assembly of Israel. Then Aaron is to go out to the altar which is before the Lord and make atonement for it. He is to take the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat and put it all around the horns of the altar. Then he is to sprinkle on it some of the blood with his finger 7 times and clean it and consecrate it from the impurities of the Israelites. The live goat ritual procedures. Verse 20. When Aaron has finished purifying the holy place, the meeting tent, and the altar, he is to present the live goat. Aaron is to lay 2 hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the sins of Israel and their transgressions regarding their sins. Thus he is to put them on the head of the goat and send it away to the desert by the hand of a man standing ready. The goat is to bear on itself all the iniquities in the inaccessible land. He is to send the goat away into the desert. Concluding rituals. Aaron must then enter the meeting tent and take off his linen garments, which he had put on when he entered the sanctuary, and leave them there. Then he must bathe his body in water in the holy place and put his clothes on, and go out and make burnt offerings and the people's burnt offerings. So he is to make atonement on behalf of himself and the people. He is to offer up the fat of the sin offering and smoke on the altar, and the one who sent away the goat to Azrael must wash his clothes, bathe his body in water, and afterwards he must re-enter the camp. The bull of the sin offering and the goat of the sin offering, whose blood was brought to make atonement in the holy place, must be brought outside of the camp must be brought outside the camp, and their hide and their flesh and their dung must be burned up. And the one who burns them must wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may re-enter the camp. Review of the Day of Atonement. This is to be a perpetual statute for you. In the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, you are to humble yourself and do no any work of any kind, both the native citizen and the resident foreigner who lives in your midst. For on this day, atonement is to be made for you to clean you from all your sins. You are to be clean before your Lord. It is to be a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you must humble yourself. It is to be a perpetual statute. The priest who is anointed and ordained as high priest in the place of his father is to make atonement. He is to put on the linen garments, the holy garments, and he is to purify the most holy place. He is to purify the meeting tent and the altar, and he is to make atonement for the priest and for the people of the assembly. This is to be a perpetual status for you to make atonement for the Israelites for all their sins once a year. So he did just as the Lord had commanded Moses. All right. That was our day 45. And in day 46, we're going to be reading Matthew 27, verses 32 through 56, and in Leviticus chapters 17 and 18. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe and comment down below. Until next time, dig into the text.